Hull shaping. The bane of any boat builder's existence. Especially if you're newer, a good-looking hull can easily be the most challenging part of FTD. Of course, I'm not just here to point you in the direction of transition blocks and decorations and telling you to figure it out. I'll show you the method I personally use in this tutorial. It's by no means perfect, but it is easy to understand, simple to apply, and with both those in mind, can actually produce results like this fairly easily. Today, we're going to be talking about the layering method for bows, and a little bit about sterns. But before we do that, we need to set up some terminology so we can understand what makes a good-looking hull. Before any blocks get placed, it's important to have a good understanding of how hulls are shaped. After all, great-looking hulls rarely have much in common with the 4-meter wedges we're very used to working with in FTD. This brings us to the first concept we're going to familiarize ourselves with. Slope staggering. Slope blocks in FTD measure between 1 to 4 meters in length. But what if you want something longer? Of course, the simplified answer is decorations, but let's take a closer look at what's happening here and take away our smooth slopes for a second. A 1 meter slope is effectively just 1 block backwards and 1 block outwards. Moving down to the 4 meter, we have 4 blocks back and still 1 outwards. Since we aren't worried about slopes at the moment, we can just extend this to 10 meters or 40 meters or, well, you probably know what infinity is. With the tools we have at hand in FTD, we can just deco stretch a slope to fit these distances. Before that was a feature in the game though, people would just have to place a 4 meter slope against the back block as an easy way to smooth that 1 meter step from a 90-degree angle down to just 14 degrees. Hence the term slope staggering. Now, all of what I just explained is horizontal slope staggering. The other kind that we will quickly touch on is vertical slope staggering. Here we have a bunch of 4 meter slopes built one on top of the other. Since they are all in a line, our vertical stagger is 0. Whereas the next example, we will have all of these slopes staggered by 1. Now here's an example that goes from bottom to top, 1, 2, 3, and 4 meters. The offset transition blocks in this game does help smoothen placement like this, though it's not hard to see that we're still fairly limited even with these in our tool belt. In order to understand the complex 3-dimensional shape that is a hull, we need to appreciate how it looks when we're looking at a 2-dimensional slice of any given segment of it. Hence why I'm giving a light introduction to this older method. So to close out, here's a vintage build of mine that only uses slope staggering. Highlighted in red is a single row of horizontal stagger, and in yellow is a single column of vertical stagger. On to our next term, concavity. Concavity is, in simple terms, a way to describe how the curvature of your hull ebbs and flows. The number of concavity you have in your bow refers to how many times the curvature changes. So on screen we have examples of single, double, and triple concavity shapes. Each time the direction of curvature changes, the concavity increases by 1. You could also look at these based on a voxel pattern. In the single concavity, the numbers are continuously increasing. In the double, they are decreasing in distance until eventually they level out and start increasing again. And of course, the triple goes from increasing to decreasing to increasing again. To demonstrate, here's that ship from earlier. For this segment, we're going to be looking specifically at the waterline, which is a double concavity section. The first concavity is highlighted in green, while the second concavity is highlighted in yellow. Here's some more examples of how to see concavity on various real-life ships. Of course, on the left, we have the rounded front of the Bismarck, and on the right, we have the baseball bat-shaped hull of the Yamato. Now, the astute among you might realize that the Io class in the middle is also a triple concavity like the Yamato. So why is it being labeled as a double? The reason is because we aren't actually looking at the deck line of the vessel like we were on the others. Rather, we are looking at how the hull is shaped at the water line, which is the dotted line in the image above. These are two important terms that you'll be hearing a lot down the road. So just to clarify, when you hear me talking about the deck line, I'm referring to the shape of the hull at the deck level. And when you hear me say waterline, I'm referring to the shape of the hull at the water level. Coming back to talk about concavity, the main reason why making a good-looking hull is such a challenge is because in most cases, the deck line and the water line are different shapes. And in most of those cases, they have completely separate concavity counts. Take the Bismarck. This could be considered a single concavity over a double concavity, or a single over a double for short. On the other hand, we have the Iowa and the Yamato, which are both triple over doubles. Now, I provide an extensive list of 2 examples, but there remain infinite possibilities. Look, I'm going to stop pulling your leg. There's only one other combination worth talking about, which is a single concavity over a single. A number of ships are actually like this, but for first-timers, I'm actually hesitant to bring this up. When you look at the front half of the waterline bow on these ships, it tends to be very straight. So while it's not a change in concavity, it can be very disorientating if one looks at a hull and thinks that the waterline is the same shape as the deck line, thus putting them in the same mental rut, holding them back to begin with. The only other kind of hull that's conceivable is a double over a double, and I've never seen this in real life. I think the reason being is because naval designers do want to part the water as the bow crashes into a wave, hence why most bows have some level of overhang. Unless it's a tumble home, we're not going to talk about those today. A cool example of a double over a double is a battleship my friend Canesian made a couple years ago. If you like workshop stuff, go check it out, link in the description. So with that, we conclude the terminology and concepts section. Understanding how hulls are shaped is more than half the battle, so pat yourself on the back for getting this far. Without wasting any time, let's glue all this together and build a demonstration hull. First things first, we need an outline of where we're going to be working. I'm looking at 4 sections in particular here. It might go without saying, but get a cross-section of that middle of your hull going. Most of the time, this is really just going to be a box with some rounded corners at the bottom. Moving all the way to the front of the ship, we're going to get a profile view of the very front of our bow. This could be any number of shapes, so just do what you think is going to be best. I've opted for a modern look with this build, so excuse the rather simplistic outline here. Take note, this is a prime place to use the wedge options available to you. If you're up for a bit more of a challenge like I usually am, you can use quite a bit of decorations to get that perfect leading edge you're looking for. The method I tend to use is 2 wedges whose tips meet at a pole to get that rounded front. Higher up on some ships, the leading edge widens out, and for that I use a deco wedge back, angled as need be. It's not perfect, but it gets the job done fairly well. To highlight the capability of the layering method, I've opted for a double concavity here. I wanted something sleek, so the shortest amount of stagger I'm going to be using here is 6 meters. Well, I'll be getting up to around 16 meters at the back of the bow for a really smooth merger into the sides of the vessel. There's only one more section left for us to do, and that's our deck line. We're going to go with a single concavity up here, as common on nearly all modern warships. We'll just build from the front backwards, and they don't line up. How could this happen? I'm back in the terminology section. Again! Oh my god! Spin shear. If you spent any amount of time looking at ships, you might have realized that many flare up towards the front. This is called shear. In FTD, the simplest way to mimic that is to build our bow decks on spin blocks so they can be rotated into position, or as we just call it, spin shear. Just because this might seem like a pro move, doesn't mean this is harder to do. It's actually quite the opposite. And as you'll see for the layering method, which I'm teaching you guys today, it's very preferable over just building the deck line on the vessel itself. There's only one glaring downside to this, and that's your entire bow deck can be shot off in just one hit. If that's iffy for you, weigh your options. but you know which direction I'll be using going forward. Building directly on that sideways spin block will rotate the camera onto its side. This isn't terrible to work with by any means, but I'm just going to make things easier to look at by using a trick I call spin correction. Basically, I just add a second spin block or piston onto the first spin block, but this time pointed upwards. Now building off of that one, everything will be in the orientation we're used to. So this is what our hull outline should vaguely look like at this point. What we're going to do from here is add our first two layers. One will work from the bottom up, and the other from the top down. And using decorations where needed, it will have a natural middle point form between the two. To achieve this, I'll largely be using 4-meter offset transitions on this build. Because I never have a horizontal stagger shorter than 6 meters in this layer, all of them will be decorations. You can use the keys Ctrl, Shift, X to place these down with ease. Just keep in mind what distances you'll be spanning when you're still in the outline phase. By default, the 4-meter offset comes with a 45-degree leading edge. But if we're lengthening it as a decoration, that angle is going to change. If we want to keep it, the solution is to increase its width to compensate. 8 meters is easy because you just have to double the length and width. But just know you might run into some funky measurements when stretching to odd numbers like 7 or 9 meters. So keep that in mind when you're making your outline, or just be ready to do a little algebra. As for the top layer, I almost always stick with using angled slopes for that nice 45 degrees of overhang. If that's too much for the job in your case, just go ahead and make those decorations too, to give them that extra half or full meter of height, thus reducing the angle. We now have our first 2 layers done. If you want to keep it simple, that's all we'll need. But the main reason I call it the layering method is because we can now go in and add as many layers as we like to smoothen this hull out. Here's an example of a 3-layer hull I made, as well as a photo of it with the middle layer removed on one side. The battleship that's been perched behind me comes out to around 5 or 6 layers in some spots. To add these middle layers to your build, you have a lot of methods at your disposal, but they're all going to involve some form of decoration work. If decos are completely alien to you, don't freak out. I have an in-depth tutorial on the subject that will teach you everything you need to know. As for how to make these decorated layers, you could keep using the angle block combos to not worry about lining up and rotating anything. Transitions are also viable in a similar capacity. If you want some precision control, the triangle generator tool in the Mimic UI mod is an obvious choice. My own selection here might be a little unconventional. Decoing 4-meter beams can cover large areas of your hull, requiring only a little bit of work on the rotational axis to get things lined up properly. At this point, I can hear a number of you asking how to do the underwater section of the bow. Suffice to say, it's fairly straightforward, although it might take some practice. Start by continuing down the lines you made from your waterline section. Round it off at the bottom, and you're all set. You probably want to bulge at the front, so just modify the work you've done to accommodate a cylinder pointing forward out of it. As you can see on this battleship, I've flared it out as it gets farther back to integrate it with the lines of the hull, but that's really all there is to it. If you're still struggling to figure out what to do with a bulge, I'd probably start by just building it out of regular blocks if I were you. And then as you start to get a shape that you're happy with, then you can use decorations to smoothen it out. We're getting towards the end of the video, and obviously I haven't gotten to anything regarding sterns, and it's not lost on me that I'm leaving out a very important chunk for you guys there. The hard truth is that it's a very bulbous area. In the bow section, we can get some pretty complex shapes very easily. That's because we could clip blocks into one another and have all the messy bits be hidden inside the hull. However, because the curve points outwards in the stern, all of the clippage then shows up on the outside where we don't want it to be. At the very least, above waterline sections are often tame enough that we can deco transition to fit our needs without making our brains hurt too bad. But we inevitably get into the nightmare zone once we go below the waterline, or having to make curvature in every direction. This is the stern of my USS Montana. While I'm super proud of it, most of this is triangle generated, and I'm not here to teach that. The triangle gen is a lot more of a tool than it is a methodology. In short, there's no simple answer for sterns. You just have to know your blocks well and what you're capable of. With all that being said, I'm not going to leave you guys on your own without some tips. So here's some things I'd be aware of if I were you. Block placement. If I had to guess, most of you are probably going to start off by sticking to the in-game slopes and transitions. To save you some headache, have the sides follow a similar stagger pattern as your bottom outline. An example would be using a 4-meter stagger on the sides of your boat, while using an 8-meter stagger on the bottom. That way, when you're using angled blocks to merge, they can always line up. If you want to get a little more complex, use those offset pieces to arc into where your merge will be. Also, when designing your stern, you might be looking at a lot of side view drawings of real-world ships. You probably noticed that the stern does a swan dive down to the keel around wherever the propellers are at. No, the hull does not have a cliff in it. These are called skegs. Think of them as more of a fin sticking out of the hull rather than being a part of it. I personally add these once I've finished my stern shaping so that they don't throw me off. Also, yeah, sterns are pretty long. A good rule of thumb is that each section of your hull, bow, middle, and stern, should take up around 1/3 of the total length. I'm going to wrap up the tutorial here. I know it was a lot, but thanks for sticking with me through all of that. I do genuinely hope you learned some things with this. Hulls are really challenging, and I do think it's awesome that you're trying to step up your game with them. Or, you're not. Your YouTube addiction has really gotten out of hand. Speaking of YouTube, if you enjoyed this, do consider checking out some of my other FTD content. I do have a fair bit in the works, especially with the ongoing misallocation series, but it really is work to make these sort of things. So if more of you guys show your support, I'll be sure to allocate more time to these projects. Anyways, I gotta go shoot myself in the foot for making that pun. I'll see you guys around.
So Miles, you know what shape that is?
Triple over a double.
Absolutely right.
Back into a triple.
Oh yeah. You aced this.